Good morning and welcome to the worship service of the Unitarian Universalist Church in Idaho Falls. My name is Arthur Cole, today's worship associate. We know you join us here for different reasons: to find community, to seek your spiritual and personal truths, to question, to nurture your heart and soul, to explore new ideas, to find comfort, and perhaps to find the answers to some of your biggest questions. We know that you will experience this service as a moment that inspires you, find a message that transforms you, and, although virtual at this time, a caring and loving community that gives meaning to your life. Do we have any announcements today? No. Thank you. So we don't. So I would just like to remind you that if you have joys, concerns, sorrows, and milestones that have affected your life in the recent past and that you would like to share with the congregation, you can do so by posting them in the chat box on the right of the screen. We also invite you to join us for our virtual coffee hour after the worship service by clicking on the link provided in the email inviting you to today's worship service. We will not have a dedicated time for an offering, but encourage you to sustain and strengthen this church by making a contribution, either by mailing a check to the church at P.O. Box 50376, Idaho Falls, Idaho 83405, or by going to the church's website at idahofallsuu.org. In the Connections menu, click on Donate to get to the Contributions page. Thank you. I invite you now to enter into the spirit of worship with the following words. May we be reminded here of our highest aspirations and inspired to bring our gifts of love and service to the altar of humanity. May we know once again that we are not isolated beings, but connected in mystery and miracle to the universe to this community and to each other. We will now light the flaming chalice, symbol of our faith, to illumine this day with thoughts from Sharon Wiley. The hours of day and night are in balance. In honor of earth-centered traditions that celebrate this time of year, we observe that the flaming chalice holds the four basic elements: earth, air, fire, water. The candle wax for earth, the air that feeds the flame, the fire we light, and the chalice itself, the cup, the symbol of water. We light our chalice and reflect on the balance we seek in our lives, the balance we seek in our hearts, and the balance we seek in our world. Prelude. Please join me in reading the Church's covenant, which is printed in your order of service. Love is the spirit of this community, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
Good morning. Our call to worship this morning is the poem Water by Wendell Berry. I was born in a drought year. That summer, my mother waited in the house, enclosed in the sun and the dry, ceaseless wind, for the men to come back in the evenings, bringing water from a distant spring. Veins of leaves ran dry, roots shrank, and all my life I have dreaded the return of that year, sure that it still is somewhere, like a dead enemy's soul. Fear of dust in my mouth is always with me, and I am the faithful husband of the rain. I love the water of wells and springs, and the taste of roofs in the water of cisterns. I'm a dry man whose thirst is praise of clouds, and whose mind is something of a cup. My sweetness is to wake in the night after days of dry heat, hearing the rain. I invite you to join in our opening hymn this morning, number 42, Morning So Fair to See.
Today's Time for All Ages is the Kaikan Water Project, read by Elizabeth Coyote, Director of Lifespan Faith Development. Sometimes, the moment you meet someone, you know they will be a very important friend in your life. Other times, friendships start slowly. You might not know how important the friendship is for many years. The partnership began between a congregation in Honolulu, Hawaii, and a Unitarian Universalist church in Kaikan, Philippines, began slowly, with children exchanging letters and pictures. After some years, Mike Young, minister of First Unitarian Church of Honolulu, had a chance to visit the Philippines, and he went to Kaikan. He met many generous, wonderful people at the partner church, but it was the Kaikan children he fell in love with. One time, a whole crowd, all ages, came swimming with him in the ocean of their coastal village. The next year, Reverend Young went back to the Philippines, and again he spent a few days in Kaikan. Again he swam in the ocean with the children. This time, one of their ministers came swimming too. Mike let the children use the dive mask he had brought. It was too big for them. Some water leaked in, but the Kaikan children did not mind because the mask helped them see their ocean fish, up close and personal. Back on land, a Kaikan minister, Reverend Terso Panka, took Mike to one of the village's hand-pumped wells to wash off the salt water. The fresh water felt good. Reverend Young cupped his hands to take a drink. Reverend Panka sounded angry. He told Mike, "You must never do that. The water is not safe." Later, Mike learned why Reverend Panka had tried to protect him. For 20 years, the children of Kaikan had been born with yellow eyes. They had a condition called jaundice, a sign of a disease called hepatitis A. Hepatitis germs were in the well water, the water he had wanted to drink. Kaikan's simple septic tanks and shallow aquifer could not adequately filter and recycle the village's water. Water used for bathing and washing came back again through the public hand-pumped wells. The village of Kaikan had no safe drinking water. Mike Young decided right then, babies in Kaikan would no longer be born with yellow eyes. Now he knew their congregation's partnership could be so much more than letters, photographs, or even visits and playing in the ocean together. In his heart, Reverend Young had already begun the Kaikan Water Project. But in a true partnership, partners make plans together. Reverend Young had to find out if the people of Kaikan wanted to work on getting clean water for the village. Maybe there was something else more important the Honolulu congregation could help them get done. So the people of Kaikan had community meetings. They talked about what was good about life in Kaikan, and the ways they could make life even better. They listed problems they had tried to solve in the past and what had worked to solve them. For problems that were not solved yet, the people talked about what they could do differently to reach a solution. They talked about the time, the money, and other resources they already had, which they could use to create solutions. They talked about ways local organizations or the government could help. Because some people don't like to talk at big meetings, community members went around to each person's house to talk with them individually. Everyone had a chance to give their ideas to make life in Kaikan even better. And the result of all this talk? The people of Kaikan agreed that clean water was the top priority to work on with their partner, the First Unitarian Church of Honolulu. After Mike Young went home to Hawaii, the Kaikan people elected a committee to lead the water project. They started looking for sources of clean water. They looked upstream of their aquifer and upstream of the recycling septic system. They found a clean, flowing spring that seemed to produce enough water for the village. The owner of the land agreed they could drill a well and pump there. When Mike returned to Kaikan, a happy parade of children, teenagers, and adults took him to sea. At first, it seemed getting water from the spring would be a lot of work. They had to dig a well, get the pump and a tank, and lay almost 2 miles of pipe to bring the water to Kaikan. They had to provide ways for people along the pipeline to get water, set up another tank, and build faucets. But sometimes we get ahead of ourselves with what a big job we've got. Reverend Young remembered the first step was just to drill the well and make sure the water would really be clean to drink. Drilling the well cost $385, a fortune in the Philippines, but not so much for the American congregation to raise. First Unitarian Church of Honolulu sent the money. The well was dug and everyone waited for test results. Would the water be safe to drink? The new well was polluted, not with hepatitis, but with a common bacteria, E. coli. The people cleaned the wellhead. They pumped more water. This time the tester said clean. Lance went ahead to lay pipe and build 6 faucets so that the village would have drinkable water. Soon, maybe there will be a tap in every home, and Kaikan babies will no longer be born with yellow eyes. It sounds like a happy ending. A partnership that started out as letters and photos and became very, very important. But there have been 2 surprising results. One is that just as the Honolulu partners helped Kaikan's Unitarian Universalist congregation bring their village clean water, the Kaikan congregation has helped other villages in the Philippines. Kaikan villagers now teach people in other communities to organize the meetings and interviews that bring good community solutions to real community problems. Another surprise, and not so happy, is that the water improvement in Kaikan may worsen the village's sewage problem. More water means more flushing. Mike Young knows the partnership's work is not finished. The next project is inevitable, a sewage system for Kaikan that works. Everything is connected. The end.
We now dedicate time to our joys, concerns, sorrows, and milestones, a time to share with this religious community events that have affected your life in the recent past, and to speak out for those we want to hold in our thoughts. So far we haven't received any joys or concerns, but I have one from Reverend Kevin Carson. And that is that in this environment of full-fledged vaccinations going on, there is light at the end of the tunnel, and he's looking forward to seeing all of us assembled here in this sanctuary. We light one last candle to lift up this joy, as well as the ones that remain in the silence of our hearts.
Our reading this morning is an excerpt from Origin of Water on Earth from the Living Cosmos website. Our solar system alone has 9 planets and dozens of moons. Yet the only one of these planetary bodies that is absolutely suitable for life is Earth. You might pause for a moment to wonder what Earth has that the other bodies don't. There is increasing evidence that some of the other planets once hosted oceans, but Earth is the only one who maintains significant amounts of water. So if Earth is unique because of its ready supply of water, how did the water get there? Turns out there is no simple answer to this question. The Earth is approximately 4.5 billion years old, and yet there is a paucity of evidence that can help scientists concretely identify the source of Earth's water. However, there are several possible explanations for our oceans. Earth and all of the planets in the solar system formed at roughly the same time. As one of the 4 terrestrial planets, Earth is composed primarily of rocky material, and some scientists believe that a little water could have been incorporated into the rocks and dust that eventually became our planet. Just how much water is unclear. But even if the incorporation of water into Earth was more favorable than predicted, processes such as photodissociation of water by UV light and the subsequent loss of hydrogen cause us to look for other sources of water. When we look around our solar system, we notice that there are large amounts of water in the outer regions, mostly in the form of ice. Comets are bodies in the outermost region of the solar system that contain huge amounts of water. They also have highly elliptical orbits that frequently bring them into the inner solar system and sometimes on a path that will cause them to collide with Earth. Scientists have estimated that no more than 10% of the water on Earth originally came from comet collisions. There are other planetary bodies to consider. Meteoritic material originating in the asteroid belt could also be responsible for bringing water to Earth. Objects in the outer part of the asteroid belt are predicted to contain up to 20% water. Jupiter's large mass and gravitational influence could easily have perturbed the orbits of asteroids in the belt, sending some of them on a one-way trip to Earth. The composition of asteroids within the belt vary depending on their distance from the Sun, so it is difficult to estimate exactly how much water could have been contributed to Earth. Like so many things in science, the exact origin of water on Earth is still unknown. Tomorrow, March 22nd, is the day designated by the United Nations as World Water Day. It is a day intended to bring attention to the importance of water in our lives and the human rights and ecological issues associated with this essential resource. For those of us in developed countries, it is too easy to take clean water for granted, though admittedly, here in the American West, water rights in periods of drought are on people's radar much more than back east. But even in America, access to clean water has become a serious problem when the infrastructure fails for some reason or when disaster strikes. Just think about Flint, Michigan, which is still struggling in the aftermath of the city's leadership's ill-fated attempt to change the source of the city's water supply from a cleaner source to the contaminated Flint River. The decision in 2013 intended to save money, but it quickly impacted the long-neglected pipeline infrastructure of the city, and lead from aging pipes began to leach into the water supply with catastrophic results. Now scores of people, particularly children, are suffering the effects of being poisoned by their drinking water, and the repercussions will last for generations. 8 years later, they are still in the process of replacing the aging pipes. And most recently, we witnessed the drinking water catastrophe in Texas after a cold snap knocked out power for millions, freezing pipes and contaminating water supplies. It revealed just how fragile the systems that supply fresh water really are in most of this country. Let us hope we learn from this, but history suggests it is unlikely. The simple fact is, we cannot live without fresh water. It is a vital resource for our own consumption, and it is essential for the crops and animals we rely on for our food. It is so essential to life that without constantly replenishing our body's water supply, we will perish in as little as 3 days. Even being a little dehydrated can impair our judgment and cause serious medical issues. Under extreme environmental conditions, such as those found in the deserts, death can come more quickly, especially for the very young, old, or infirm. This is why the human rights organization No More Deaths, No Más Muertes, leaves caches of water in the desert along the border with Mexico in areas commonly used for illegal border crossings. Death from dehydration is the #1 killer of undocumented people, making the dangerous crossing to the United States in search of a better life. And since the mid-1990s, at least 6,000 men, women, and children have died in the attempt. Incidentally, since 2008, No More Deaths has been an official ministry of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Tucson. Humankind has long recognized this vital relationship with water, even though we have often treated this precious resource as if it were inexhaustible, and even recklessly fouled the very water sources on which our lives depend. But let us acknowledge, too, that water can be dangerous to us as well as beneficial. In its flowing, mutable form, it can move mountains and lay waste to cities and crops, and sweep us to our death in raging floods and tidal waves. Water has the power to give life or to take it. It can be both beautiful and ruthless, so it is no surprise that water would inspire veneration and fear, enjoying a long spiritual connection in many religious traditions, often associated with deities and spirits. It was the god Poseidon and many lesser deities for the Greeks, Lir, the god of the sea for the ancient Celts, Ganga, the goddess of the Ganges for the Hindus, and Suijin, the water god, and the many water spirits of Shinto, just to name a few. It is common for water to be at the heart of creation stories, from the emergence of Turtle Island from the waters in Native American traditions to the breath of God moving over the waters in the book of Genesis. And it is often water rituals that through which we reconnect to the sacred, Whether it is the Christian sacrament of baptism or the many forms of ritual immersion and bathing in other religious traditions, such as the mikvah practice of Judaism, the wudu of Islam, and the misogi of Shinto. The clear, cleansing presence of water is seen as transformative and healing, and cleansing the body with water is sometimes a preparatory stage for prayer or before entering a sacred place. Long before we knew anything about life's origins in the primordial seas of earth, we seem to feel a profound, sacred connection between water and human life. It is as if we have always known deep within our souls that water is somehow special. From science, we have learned that water is indeed very special. It has unique chemical properties that appear to be essential to the very formation of life. For example, because of its highly polarized structure and simple composition, H2O, that first molecular formula everyone learns in school, is a fantastic solvent that allows inorganic salts to form the ionic solutions so critical to biologic processes. Water also has a high specific heat capacity, meaning that the transitions from solid to liquid and liquid to vapor and vice versa require an above average absorption or loss of heat. Were it not for this property of water and the fact that 2/3 of the Earth's surface is covered with water, we would not have the relatively stable atmospheric conditions that allow us to live. Instead, we would experience wild fluctuations in the air temperature daily, possibly by hundreds of degrees. I could go on about other amazing properties of water, but I think you get the point. Water is very special, and it is a very special gift that we should never take for granted. It is a gift, though, that not everyone enjoys equally. Most of us have easy access to fresh water in abundant supply, whether through municipal water systems or private wells, while in some parts of the world fresh water is a scarce commodity. And as the earth warms from our burning of carbon fuels, one of the major impacts we are beginning to see is the redistribution of water as the location, intensity, and frequency of storms shifts around the world. There will be winners and losers as ecosystems that have been stable for thousands of years become disruptive. Some models predict, for example, that in the eastern U.S., ecosystems will shift northward, with the southern Appalachians becoming hotter and drier, more like the pine flatwoods forest of northern Florida, and the New England forest transitioning from a northern hardwood to an oak hickory forest like you see further south today. A likely consequence of this changing climate will be the end of sugar maples in New England and the spectacular fall foliage with it. And you can only imagine the way that such a wholesale disruption of ecosystems will impact animal species that have adapted to their environments for millennia. It is a grim picture indeed, and it cries out for us to do something to at least lessen the damage. For human beings, these changing patterns in water distribution will mean that some of us will see increased rainfall and flooding, while others will see extended periods of drought and famine that could last for decades. It will impact the lives of millions, probably billions of people. And it is likely that mass human migrations and social upheaval will be inevitable as climate refugees seek more hospitable areas to live in. Even today, it is estimated that 880 million people, roughly 12% of the world's population, do not have access to adequate clean water. The majority of these are people living in sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America. But they also are in scattered pockets around the globe, some even within the United States. It is mostly an issue that impacts those in developing countries, but as the climate changes, anyone could soon be impacted. According to the United Nations, lack of access to clean water coupled with poor sanitation kills more people globally every year than all forms of violence and warfare combined. And women and children are disproportionately affected by both the current global situation and the looming catastrophe of climate change for several reasons. Death from disease due to dehydration and the lack of clean water is the most direct impact. A child dies from a waterborne illness every 19 seconds. Every 19 seconds. And most of these deaths are preventable. Just think of how many children have died just since we started our worship service this morning. And there are indirect impacts to consider. When people do not have convenient access to clean water, it is most often the women and children who must fetch the daily water supply. This can mean hours of walking to and from water sources that are often contaminated ponds or swamps, toting the ubiquitous plastic jugs that you see in developing countries that can weigh as much as 40 pounds each. The UN estimates that 3 hours a day is the typical labor required, but often it is much more. This is time that is not spent on education or more productive work. It is estimated that if water access issues were eliminated on the African continent, it would save as much as 40 billion hours of labor per year. Just imagine the benefit if only a fraction of that time were spent on education instead, not to mention the millions of dollars in economic gains. And if these reasons don't cry out enough for justice already, consider the physical danger that women and girls often experience in the act of fetching water. In many parts of the world, the daily journey for water brings with it the real potential for rape and murder. And it is particularly dangerous in areas in political turmoil, often the very areas that lack water infrastructure to begin with. These horrific crimes are happening every day. When we start pulling back on the layers of issues like water justice, it is easy to feel overwhelmed. Responding to something like changing climate patterns is certainly beyond the reach of us as individuals, except in small ways. But of course, we can work to influence government policy and public opinion. But there are water justice issues that are well within our reach. Back in 2011, I read a news story online about Rachel Beckwith, who was a young American girl who learned that many people die every year from the lack of clean drinking water. You may remember this since it was featured by all the major news outlets. For her 9th birthday, she wanted to raise $300 for the organization Charity Water. So she created an online campaign on their website. And she asked her family and friends not to buy her any birthday presents, but to give money to her campaign instead. By her 9th birthday on June 12, 2011, she had raised $220, just a little short of her goal. A few weeks later, on July 20th, Rachel was traveling in a car with her mother and sister when it was involved in a 13-vehicle accident not far from her Bellevue, Washington home. Her mother and sister escaped with minor injuries, but Rachel was taken to the hospital in critical condition. On June 23rd, her family was forced to make the difficult decision to turn off her life support. A pastor from her church then reopened the donor page that she had created. News of her charity quickly spread after her death, and suddenly donations from across the world poured into Charity Water in her name. On August 12th, Rachel's campaign collections broke the $1 million mark. And when the campaign officially ended on October 1st, 2011, it had raised $1,271,713, bringing clean water to over 37,000 people. Like so many others, when I read her story, I immediately felt moved to donate to her cause. And over the next few months, I found myself checking back on the website every day or so to see how it was going. I remain thankful for this young girl for the gift of hope I received by watching the numbers grow higher and higher. Because one person cared, the lives of over 37,000 people were changed for the better almost overnight. It shows that this is a problem that we can solve as individual people who care, even if the world's governments are unwilling to do it. I have continued to donate to Charity Water every month since, and I would encourage you to consider doing so if this issue is important to you. They have an excellent website where you can see photos of their projects, and they even provide the GPS coordinates for the specific project you're funding. It is a rare chance to see exactly how and where your donation will make a difference. To date, they have provided clean water to over 11 million people in 29 countries. Access to clean water is a basic human right, an organic, evolutionary right that all living beings should enjoy. It should never be politicized or held hostage to corporate greed. And this is happening in some parts of the world. It is despicable that corporations are looking for ways to profit by monopolizing access to water. And it is troubling that the world's superpowers are looking at water as a strategic resource for exploitation. If you think the wars fought over oil are bad, just wait until the water wars begin. But it doesn't have to be this way. We can do something about it, and we must. If we only have enough will and sacrificial spirit, there are plenty of viable solutions to start making things better. I have talked mostly about fresh water this morning, but before I close, I feel compelled to say something more about salt water in the oceans. And of course, the world's oceans face a host of unique environmental threats we can talk about at some other time. Even though fresh water is essential to life, we are forever connected to the seas. It is common to hear how our blood is similar to seawater in terms of salinity and pH, and there is some truth to this, but there is also some significant differences. Another statistic that is most likely a coincidence is that our bodies contain roughly the same percentage of water, 60 to 70%, as the percentage of the Earth's surface that is covered by water. But even so, we have an inescapable connection. Life on Earth evolved first in the ancient seas, where chemical components could combine to form the first complex organic molecules that led to the formation of RNA and DNA, and eventually the first living cells. We come from the water. We are made of water. Water is life. So let us give thanks for the waters of the earth. It is up to all of us to conserve and protect this precious resource. And in honor of World Water Day, let me close with a brief passage from the environmentalist Rachel Carson that speaks poetically to the interdependent web of life and our relationship with the earth's waters. To stand at the edge of the sea, to sense the ebb and flow of the tides, to feel the breath of a mist moving over a great salt marsh, to watch the flight of shorebirds that have swept up and down the surf lines of the continents for untold thousands of years, to see the running of the old eels and the young shad to the sea, is to have knowledge of things that are as nearly eternal as any earthly life can be. I invite you now to join in our closing hymn, number 209, O Come, You Longing, Thirsty Souls. Our closing words are a meditation on water by Paula Gunn Allen. Water, lakes and rivers, oceans and streams, springs, pools and gullies, arroyos, creeks, watersheds, Pacific, Atlantic, Mediterranean, Indian, Caribbean, China Sea, lying, dreaming on shallow shores, Arctic, Antarctic, Baltic, Mississippi, Amazon, Columbia, Nile, Thames, Sacramento, Snake, Undulant Woman River, Seine, Rio Grande, Willamette, Mackenzie, Ohio, Hudson, Po, Rhine, Rhone. Rain, after a lifetime of drought, that finally cleanses the air, the soot from our eyes, the dingy windows of our western home, the rooftops and branches, the wings of birds, the new light on a slant, pouring, making everything new.
Please join me in reading the words for the extinguishing of our chalice flame. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.